$10,000 is what I was quoted to outfit this room with custom cabinets, drawers, floating shelf, the whole 9 yards. But all of that work is way easier than you think. In this video, I'm showing you everything. How to build them, what tools to use, which ones to avoid, and the mistakes I made that you'll want to avoid too.
But don't worry, these kinds of gaps are super easy to fix, and no one will ever know.
Plus, I've been working on 2 huge things that I can finally share with you that would take you from cabinet beginner to cabinet pro. Let's get right into it. Previously, my wife and I moved out of our apartment and into our first house. I gave this blank slate of a garage a massive facelift by insulating it, putting up drywall, installing a heat pump so I can comfortably work no matter how hot or how cold it is, and in the last episode, I built this massive miter saw station to easily and efficiently break down materials for projects.
But now that the shop is set up, I can finally use this space to do what it's intended to do: build projects.
First order of business, transform this sad, miserable laundry room into our dream space. Let's get started. There are a lot of places that can make projects go wrong. Bad joinery and poor measurements are probably what come to mind first. But the reality is that from the second you start cutting plywood down for a cabinetry project, you can run into issues. Now, if you have leftover scraps that are manageable to handle, it's pretty easy to run these through the table saw with the help of some stock guides to rip them down to final width, but a panel this large is going to need some additional attention to cross-cut to length accurately. I like to use my track saw with a track square attached to get a perfectly square cut on the end of the panel and also remove the factory edge that's often beat up during transportation. I know that this end is now perfectly square, so to get repeatable lengths, I attach a parallel guide to my square. Dial in the measurement, flip down the stop, and then I can make repeatable cuts over and over again. Inevitably, you aren't always going to have smaller scraps to work with that are easy to handle on the table saw. So, with big, full-size sheets, I lay down some insulation foam on my workbench and use my track saw to first rip off the dinged up factory edge. You may not think that this is entirely necessary, but it will make your cabinets join together so much better. See the difference between the factory edge and my clean edge? To replicate what I did earlier, ripping the panel to final width on the table saw, I can attach parallel guides to my track. Again, setting the measurement I want, butting the stop against my fresh cut edge, and making an effortless rip cut just like my table saw would, but I don't have to manhandle a giant heavy sheet of plywood. I can make repeatable rip cuts over and over again without having to adjust a single thing. There's a link to these track saw accessories and all of the other tools I'm using during today's video, link down in the description below. Before I get too far into things, let's jump into my 3D modeling software and show you a rendering of what I want this space to look like. Alright, so it is a tight space, but we can do a lot with this. Washer and dryer will go against the walls, and then I can toss in a narrow cabinet between them with some drawers for things like dryer sheets and a trash can for the dryer lid. Above the machine, I'm going to put in a floating shelf to 1, hide the gap between the machines and the wall, and also give my wife a spot to toss a few decorations. Up top, I'm going to build 2 larger cabinets for all of the laundry supplies, and on the left, I'm going to make 2 smaller cabinets and have some kind of hanging rod underneath for hanging up clothes. Alright, now that you understand what I'm building, let's get back into the garage. In the past, I've been pretty adamant about miter saws and miter saw stations being a complete waste of space and that no one needs them. But after building this setup last episode, I admit I was wrong. Previously, I never built really large structures or pieces that required tons and tons of repetitively sized pieces. But after moving into our new house and needing to renovate a lot of rooms, I found myself building tons and tons of cabinets which do require a lot of repeated cuts. Being able to set up a stop block to a precise measurement and make cut after cut knowing that they are all exactly the same has been a game changer in my speed and productivity. Now, this miter saw station might look like all the others out there, but it has a ton of hidden features that fix all of the common issues, but no need to address that here. You can watch my previous video that deep dives into this entire thing. Woodworkers are notorious for hoarding useless scraps that I'll use one day. For the most part, I am pretty lean when it comes to holding onto materials. The one thing that I always keep though is scrap plywood. Here's why. We already have the sides, tops, and bottoms cut down for all the cabinets, but I also need to cut down some smaller cross members or nailers. Now, these will never be seen, so why waste good material on these? I mean, sure, I aim for them to be roughly 4 inches wide, but even if they're a little bigger or a little smaller, it doesn't really matter. This allows me to be much more efficient with materials and save from just throwing scraps out. Oh, by the way, I just released these custom zero clearance inserts for the Festool Capex on my website. I'm doing a limited run of them, so grab one before they sell out. Now, not all of those scraps are going to cut it, so I also keep long cutoff pieces. Here's what I mean about not being too concerned about the size of these cross members. I wanted them to be about 4 inches, but these offcuts were a little thinner, so about 3.5 inches will work just fine. One thing that is super helpful when ripping down plywood for cabinet projects are these table saw stock guides. They hold your piece tightly against the fence and the wheels only roll one way, so it helps prevent nasty kickback. It's a real win-win if you ask me. One of the comments I saw in my previous video about building the miter saw station is that my stop block can't get any closer than about 15 inches. So how do I make repeatable cuts smaller than that? Easy. Just take any scrap piece of plywood, clamp it down, and you've got a close stop block that will make repeated cuts. Not fancy, but it works great. Now, why are these pieces so small though? That's because this cabinet is going to nest between the washer and dryer, so it will be pretty narrow, but my other cabinets will be about 16 inches wide. Behind the scenes, I've been working on a massive, multi-hour long video course deep diving into cabinet construction with automated part calculators and teaching you absolutely everything you need to know about cabinetry. I'm not done with the course quite yet, but if you're interested in learning more about it, scan this QR code to be notified when it launches, or click the link in the description.
So with all of these parts and pieces cut down to size, we can start assembling things. And without a doubt, the easiest part of this project is going to be the toe kick, so let's start there.
When it comes to building cabinets, you need a toe kick or a small recess platform that your cabinets sit on top of. This recess is where your toes will naturally go when you're standing in front of the cabinet. Without them, you will kick the front of the cabinet and it will be really awkward. Thus, you make a toe kick. A lot of people, like my good friend Matt from MWA Woodworks, likes to do integrated toe kicks where you notch out part of the side panel and it's built in or integrated into the cabinet itself. I find that works great for smaller runs of cabinets, but if you're doing a larger bank of cabinets like I did with my miter saw station, I find it so much easier to shim and level one giant separate toe kick and then just set your cabinets on top of the already level platform. That's why I opt for separate toe kicks. As far as assembly goes, I prefer just to keep things simple here and drill out some pocket holes. They're quick, easy, strong, and you'll never see them. Once they're drilled out, I clamp my pieces securely together so they don't slide around and fire in screws to secure all the pieces. Now before I go putting the main body of the cabinets together, I'm going to rip down a sheet of 1/4 inch plywood to act as a back panel. Oh, and here's another miter saw trick. Let's say your miter saw only cuts about halfway through your cut. Just flip the board over and finish the cut on the other side. Not bad.
So I now have got all the pieces cut down that are gonna make up that lower cabinet between the washer and the dryer. But I'm gonna try a little bit of a different cabinet construction. So instead of building them like my miter saw station, I'm actually going to be recessing a 1/4 inch back panel in them to make everything a little bit more finished. And let me show you how.
I don't know about you, but I'm prone to making mistakes, so I always mark out where I need these grooves to house the back panel. Over at the table saw, I make a groove, tap the fence over just a bit to widen the groove, make another pass, and repeat the same steps one more time to create a groove to house the back panel. Grabbing my back panel, you can see that it's, well, not a great fit. So, on the same scrap piece, I adjusted my fence until I got a perfect setup. Super tight like this with no gap is exactly what I'm looking for. The other thing you can do is use a router table with a small bit and again make multiple passes to get a correctly sized groove, which gives you pretty much the identical result. That's definitely slower, so if you want to do it all in one pass on the router table, you can pick up one of these bits that's sized exactly to the thickness of plywood that gives you a perfect groove in one single pass. But by far the fastest and most efficient way is to use a dado stack on the table saw. I found that by using just the outside blade on the dado stack, I could get the perfect size groove for my back panel to fit in. And while I had the dado stack out, I ran a groove down the center of my lower cabinet to house a shelf, but you'll see that in a minute. There's nothing more that fires up woodworkers than the way cabinets are fastened together. None of this will ever be visible, and I've got quite a few cabinets I need to put together, so I'm using pocket hole screws here. The top, bottom, and 2 cross members of the cabinet get pocket holes drilled into them, and then I can add a small bead of glue onto the center dado that I cut earlier that will hold the center partition. Is this overkill for the cabinet this small? Oh, absolutely it is. But sometimes I find it fun to throw in unnecessary features into projects, and come on, that looks good there. Probably the best fitting dado I've ever cut. Since we made the groove in the back side of the cabinet, I can now slide the back panel in place. Once that back panel is in place, I can go to town firing absolutely way too many pocket hole screws, and this lower cabinet is all finished. Well, constructed. It's not finished. The pre-finished plywood that I spent good money on, I'm actually going to scratch it up on the outside of the cabinet, but more on why I did that later. There are 2 main types of cabinets you can build. One is frameless, which you see behind me. In frameless cabinetry, you use some sort of edge banding to cover up the exposed plywood edges, and you've got great looking, simple, clean, modern cabinets. The other option is building cabinets with face frames. One isn't necessarily better than the other, but I asked my wife what she wanted for the laundry room, and she said face frames, so face frames it is. Now for face frame construction, by far the easiest method is to assemble them with pocket hole screws. And fun fact, this is actually what pocket hole screws were originally intended for, not your 2x4 coffee tables with walnut stain. Don't like pocket hole screws? No problem, you can also use dominoes to join these pieces together. But what if you don't have a domino? Well, check this out. This bad boy just came out on the market and it's like a 1/4 of the price. All you need to do is chuck up the specific cutter in your cordless drill, line up the center mark on your workpiece to the one etched in on the jig, insert the drill into the collar, and then slide the handle back and forth. Once you reach your bottom position, remove the drill, press the reset button, and you've got a domino-shaped mortise for 1/4 of the price. Pretty cool, huh? Then, just like the domino, you can pick up these floating tenons that slide inside the mortise. Throw a little glue in there and boom, you've got 3 perfectly good methods for assembling a face frame. Let me pop on the other side and now I've got a completed face frame for that lower center cabinet. Now one pro tip I have is to assemble your face frames oversized on the ends. Once the glue is cured, you can chop off the excess to get things perfectly flush with no fuss. See? Perfect. I want to make some drawers for this lower cabinet, but first I'm going to make the drawer fronts. In order to make these as durable as possible, I'm going to rip down some hard maple. Now these drawer fronts aren't just solid pieces of wood. No, I'm going to be making some shaker style drawer fronts. The long strips of maple get a groove cut down the center before getting chopped to length at the miter saw. I can then cut a tenon on the end that will slot into the center groove for rock solid joinery. Now, this process can seem complicated, but with the right instruction, you can crank out beautiful, high-quality shaker-style doors and drawer fronts with ease. If you're looking for an incredibly detailed deep dive into everything you need to know about making shaker-style panels, something that to really cover all the important aspects would take a few hours to cover, I just launched my online course, Mastering Shaker-Style Doors and Drawer Fronts. That course is a masterclass on everything you need to know, from sizing the panel, calculating the size of every individual piece, fixing common mistakes, proper finishing, installing hardware, and so much more. It's over 2.5 hours of crystal clear, HD, 4K video chopped into more than 45 bite-sized chapters for you to easily reference back to in the future that are really slowed down and focus on teaching you every single detail you need. Absolutely nothing is unturned. The reality is there are a lot of calculations that go into making shaker-style doors and drawer fronts, which is why I've included my automated calculator completely free as a bonus for enrolling in the course. Up until the end of April, it's going to be on a massive sale. So check it out if you want to learn how to master shaker-style doors and drawer fronts without having to scrub through tons and tons of YouTube videos that skip the important details. To learn more, scan the QR code on screen, check out the link in the description, or head to SpencleyDesignCo.com. One pro tip here is that when you're building shaker-style drawer fronts, make sure to use 1/2 inch thick MDF instead of 1/4 inch thick MDF for the center panel. This will build up the back side of the panel and make it perfectly flat against the drawer box. That way, once you install the drawer pull hardware, you don't risk the center panel bowing from the pressure. Here's another pro tip. Glue up the drawer front oversized, and then once the glue is dried, you can cut off the excess to reveal perfect joinery, again, without the stress of aligning everything during the glue up. Those are some freebies, but the full course on shaker-style doors and drawer fronts dives into a boatload more. But enough on those. Let's jump into making some drawer boxes. Unfortunately, drawers are an inevitable part of any cabinetry project. Search YouTube and you will see thousands of videos showing you how to build them, but most people complicate the daylights out of the whole process. I want to make it simple for you. First, I mill hard maple down to 5/8 inches thick. Not too thick, not too thin, but the Goldilocks of drawer boxes in my opinion. I got 18-inch drawer slides, so I cut my sides to 18 inches on the miter saw. Now for the front and back pieces, instead of using a complicated formula, I simply take my tape measure and measure across the undermount slides. In this case, 6¼ inches. Move over to the table saw, slide the fence to 6¼ inches, and make the cut. Now, what sets people off more than face frame and cabinetry construction? Drawer box construction. Rabbets, dovetails, brad nails, the list goes on and on. They all work, but what I always come back to time after time is simply using pocket hole screws. These get drilled into the front and back and they will never be seen, but more on that a little bit later. With all my pieces cut for the outside of the drawer, I also need to cut a groove to house the bottom panel. Just like on the cabinets, there are a million ways to cut this groove, but nudging the table saw fence over is an easy method. But before you adjust the fence, raise the blade up and cut the groove off the back of the drawer. You'll see why in a second. Now glue the box together and fire in some screws that hold everything in place. While the glue dries, I grab some 1/4 inch pre-finished plywood and cut it down to size to fit in the drawer box. And because I cut out the groove on the back of the drawer, I can easily slide the panel in place. To keep the panel from sliding out though, I can drill a few holes and fire in some screws. Don't want to use screws there? No problem. Another method is to use a nail gun to pin it in place. They both work, totally up to you. Almost done here. Next, I need to drill out a hole in the back of the drawer to allow the drawer slide to lock in place. A jig works, but you can also just take your slide, give it a little tap to dent the wood, and now I know exactly where I need my hole. No jig required. Alright, last step is to grab a self-centering bit and use it to pre-drill holes for the clips and then drive in screws to secure them in place. Boom, perfect drawer box. I also need to build a larger drawer box for the cabinet between the washer and dryer. I'm not gonna lie, building multiple drawer boxes can be a lot of work. Balancing a full-time engineering job while running my woodworking business means my brain is running at full tilt all the time. Between designing, filming, editing, and of course, actually building, mental fatigue is real. That's why I rely on Element to keep my mind sharp and my energy steady. It's more than just hydration. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and magnesium help regulate brain function, keeping me focused whether I'm crunching numbers or cutting joinery. But what makes Element different from everything else? No sugar, no junk, just the electrolytes I need to stay dialed in. And the best part, no afternoon crashes. If you're balancing work, life, and a passion project like me, give Element a shot. Your brain will thank you. Go to drinkelement.com/SDC, and all my viewers can claim a free Element sample pack when they make any purchase through my link. The Element sample pack includes 1 packet of every flavor. This is the perfect offer for anyone who is interested in trying all the flavors or wants to introduce a friend to Element. And now the drawer box is complete, let's turn to building a countertop for that center cabinet. Hear me out. I know it may feel like I'm jumping around a little bit, but this sequence of events will all make sense once we get it into the laundry room and start getting everything together. Now, for the countertop, my wife picked out some beautiful quarter sawn white oak. Quarter saw means that the wood is produced by first cutting a log into quarters and then sawing each quarter with the growth rings generally 60 to 90 degrees on the face of the board, resulting in straighter, more stable, and, the reason I like it, more visually appealing grain pattern. None of that nasty cathedral grain here. I buy this stuff rough sawn, so I need to mill it down. First, on the joiner. Now, this little joiner, it's alright. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it took me close to 2 full days to get this thing calibrated, and it's really just too small to be useful for any board over, say, 3 or maybe 4 feet. But a few passes will bring one face nice and flat, and then I can run the edge over the joiner also to give me a perfectly straight line. Now with the flat face, I can run the boards through the planer, taking multiple passes until they are perfectly flat. These boards are obviously not wide enough for a countertop, so I can rip a parallel edge on the table saw and then these boards can come together nicely. Now, it's completely unnecessary to do this, but you can't call yourself a woodworker unless you overbuild and over-engineer everything, right? So for this panel glue up, I tossed in some dominoes. I am not doing this for strength, but rather doing it to help keep the boards in alignment with one another. After the glue cooks for a while, you can see that it's perfectly flat. Well, not the other side. When doing panel glue ups, I like to glue everything together and if possible, mill the panel to its final thickness once all the boards are glued together. This saves me a ton of time sanding. Now with it perfectly flat, I can cut it to its final size and we'll come back to that in just a bit. One of the other requests from my wife was a giant floating shelf. She wanted this to match the countertop, so again, I used some quarter sawn white oak. She wanted it to be fairly thick, but I didn't want to spend a ton of money on this part, so I've got a little hack for you. But first, just like the countertop, my board wasn't wide enough, so I need to glue multiple boards up to make a panel. Now a 6-foot+ long panel is where using dominoes to keep everything in alignment actually really does help. It makes the glue up so much easier, but whatever you do, do not waste your time making custom tenons with your scrap wall nut. It is a complete waste of time. I tallied up how much time I spent turning all my scraps into tenons to use, and it ended up being about twice as expensive as just buying them in bulk. Learn from my mistakes, don't make your own. Again, once the glue cooked up, I can run the panel through the planer to get it to final thickness and clean up all that glue. When sanding a big piece like this, I like to use a pencil to mark up the entire surface. This gives me a visual indicator of where I'm finished sanding and where I need to spend a little bit more time. Remember how I wanted this panel to actually be thicker? Here's my trick that I alluded to earlier. I can set my blade at 45 degrees and then rip the larger panel down to the finished width that I want. Now I can take that offcut, flip it 180 degrees, and adjust the fence so it just barely meets the bevel. And when I bring the pieces back together, you get this triangular cutout. If I flip the front board up on its side, you can now see the two pieces meet together, giving the illusion that the board is thicker than it really is. Pretty cool, huh? Again, this is such a long panel, and having the miter will make the glue up even more complicated. So I tossed in some dominoes there to help make sure that everything was aligned across the entire joint. 1 or 2 clamps squeeze the pieces together, and the squeeze out lets me know that there won't be any gaps. There's one problem with doing this though. Once the cooking is done, I can take the shelf out of the clamps to reveal that perfect grain wrap. But unfortunately, it's also a ridiculously sharp edge. Easy fix though. In my miter saw station, I can slide out my bin that houses my trim router, grab a battery off my battery wall, and with a roundover bit, I can ease that edge over. With the edge rounded over, I can cut the shelf to its final length and then get ready for finish. My wife picked out this white 5% color, and I couldn't be happier because hard wax oils are incredibly easy to apply. Just pour it on, wipe it around with a plastic spreader, wipe off the excess, and you're done. But let's turn to the laundry room for a second and address something. This is the eyesore of a laundry room we have. There is absolutely no storage for laundry things and nowhere to hang up clothes. Notice something weird? This dryer is insanely far from the wall, like almost a foot off the wall, which takes up much needed space in this tiny room. Let's fix that. We pulled the machines out of the laundry room, and here's the culprit, this hard pipe that is sticking out of the wall. I did a bit of Googling and Amazoning and found this little guy that will actually sit inside of the wall and let me push the dryer another 6 inches or so further back. Now ideally you would install something like this before you put the drywall up, but I can make it work. I marked out a rough opening with a Sharpie and then got to use the most obnoxious tool out there, the multi-tool, to cut out the drywall. I mean, just listen to this thing scream. The recessed box just pops right into the wall, and then it's time for some very lackluster drywall work. Don't worry though, I taped the seams, did multiple coats, and cleaned it up off camera. But this is a woodworking channel, not a drywall channel, so let's get back in the garage for some building. These upper cabinets are going to be different. Instead of drawers, they're going to have doors, and to keep everything organized, I'm going to be throwing in some adjustable shelves. To do that, you obviously need to drill out holes for the shelf pins, which you can do with one of these basic jigs. Just set the jig on the edge of your panel and drill out the hole. Simple. But the issue is on delicate veneer like pre-finished plywood, you often get a tiny bit of tear out. Here's a simple fix for that though. Lay down a strip of masking tape to protect the surface. Put the jig back over the piece, and use the indexing pin to keep consistent spacing down the panel, and you can drill out more shelf pin holes. I tried to satisfyingly pull the tape up in one go, but didn't go as planned. But here's a close-up on the hole drilled without the tape versus with the tape. Big difference, huh? That jig works great, but I'm always trying to find ways to do things faster and on a bigger scale, so I did some research and found this shelf pin sled for my router that attaches to my track saw track. These holes are the perfect spacing for shelf pins, and all I need to do is flip the little tab on the sled, slide the router into the next hole, plunge it in, and I've got perfect holes on larger panels. Pro tip if you try this though. Make sure to clamp the track down to your panel to ensure everything stays perfectly in line. In a matter of maybe 5 minutes, I got all the shelf pin holes drilled in my cabinet sides, and look at the quality of the cut the router gave. These upper cabinets are going together the exact same way as the lower cabinet with one small change. To make mounting them to the wall easier, I'm going to cut a 45-degree bevel on the upper crossmember piece for a fancy feature that you'll see in just a bit. Again, I'm going to fly through building these upper cabinets. Remember how I randomly put a 45-degree bevel piece in the back of those cabinets? Here's why. With some scrap plywood, I can rip another 45-degree bevel down the length of the piece. Ooh, by the way, zero clearance inserts for the Festool Capex are now in stock and shipping on my website, with more saws to come soon. I also launched a ton of other products, so check those out as well. And now see how this piece slots into the back of the cabinet. I can take my scraps and attach them to the studs in my laundry room where possible, and then use some strong drywall anchors to do the rest of the holding. Now my cabinet slots into the cleat and holds it up perfectly. I fired in the rest of the cleats into the wall, and I can head back into the garage. It will be much easier to install everything if all the cabinets are aligned, so I can clamp them together, making sure the fronts are perfectly parallel with one another, and fire in some screws to hold them together. Now, just slide this larger unit onto the cleats, but what about the other side? The beauty of making cabinets is that in general, the construction is exactly the same no matter how small or how large they are. I cut a groove in the sides and bottom for the back panel to sit in, I assemble the cabinet with pocket hole screws, I slide that back panel in place, and fire in more screws to hold the 45-degree angle cleat in. Boom! Great cabinets each and every time. Just rinse and repeat for all the cabinets you need, and you've got yourself beautiful, dare I say, highly attractive cabinets. Don't make this weird though. You took that too far. Anyway, these cabinets also need to get fastened together to make installing them easier, and then I can take them into the laundry room, plop them up on the cleat, and then fasten this segment to the larger bank of cabinets. Then it's time for the hard part. Cabinets really aren't too tough to build, but installing them in a way that makes them look really good, well, that's where the challenging part comes in. And if it wasn't hard enough already, these cabinets are wedged between two walls, which means I need to scribe the face frame to fit between both walls. Not the easiest feat in the world. So to start, I tossed together a face frame for the two large cabinets. Oversized just like the lower one, and once it's dry, I can use the track saw and the table saw to rip off all of the excess for nice, clean joints. Now to make scribing it to the wall easier, I'm going to remove this section so I can have a lot less material to hack away. Back in the laundry room, I can clamp the face frame into place, and you can see how the wall is not even whatsoever. Building cabinets and scribing them could be a several hour-long video all on its own. In fact, I'm working on that right now to teach you absolutely everything you need to know, but it's not ready quite yet. There's a link in the description if you want to be notified when it releases. One way to cut the scribe line is with a jigsaw. It's effective and it works, but hopping over on the bandsaw does it even faster. The other option is just using an aggressive sander to remove the material down to your line. Regardless of how you do it, scribing is an inevitable part of any cabinet making process. But now I can pop the face frame back up and you can see how much closer it fits to the wall. Not perfect, but a significant difference. Now with one giant face frame, you can't do both of these at the same time, so I scribe my other side to the wall before then coming back to attach them together. Now she fits like a glove. Did you know that if your miter saw can't quite make a full pass of material, you can lift up the front to complete the cut? Handy little tip dab in your back pocket, but let's get back on track with what this section is about. Doors. To match the drawer fronts on the lower section, I'm going to make some shaker style doors for the upper cabinets. When making doors like this, you have two options. One option is to use a thinner, 1/4 inch thick center panel, which will give you the recessed look on both sides of the door. The other option, the option that my wife and I chose for the doors in the laundry room, is having a completely flat backside to the door. So just like with the drawer fronts, I can use a dado stack to hog out some material on the center panel to allow it to slot into the groove cut into the rails and stiles on the door. Neither one is right or wrong, just personal preference. You will notice that I intentionally cut my stiles or my vertical parts of the doors too long. Why? Because just like with the face frames, it's so much easier to not have to stress about getting perfect alignment during the glue up. I can wait until the glue has cured, and then I can use my track saw to cut to the exact line that I marked out from the center panel. This leaves me with a door that's cut to its perfect size and perfectly square. Work smarter, not harder, people.
All right, want to know another thing that I'm not going to lie to you about? Take a closer look.
The doors look amazing on the front, and on the back side, they look good too. Well, no, not so fast. There's a big gap here, a smaller gap here, a small gap here, and a small gap over here. Even with thick paint, these gaps will absolutely show, and I need to do something to address those.
But don't worry, these kinds of gaps are super easy to fix, and no one will ever know.
Making mistakes is an inevitable part of woodworking, especially when you are learning a new skill like building these doors or drawer fronts for the first time. In my 2.5 hour plus long course that deep dives into everything you need to know, I cover tons of fixes for issues you may encounter. And the beauty is that unlike here on YouTube, where once I upload a video, I can't edit, add, or change anything, the course is on my own website, which means I can add even more lessons whenever I want, and since you have lifetime access after you enroll, you get all of the new videos for free. Want to know another thing that every YouTube video skips but is critical when making painted doors? Here you go.
So now that I've got those small gaps filled up with epoxy, these things are ready for paint and primer, right? No, not quite. I need to ease the transition between the floating center panels and the rails and stiles, but luckily that's super easy to do.
The reality is that wood moves over time, and if you want small hairline gaps, by all means, skip this step. But if you want to take your doors and drawer fronts to the next level, pick up some of this super stretchy caulk, snip off the end, take a few scrap blocks and a piece of sandpaper, and create a bevel on the tip of the caulk tube. You can then use that bevel to get into the corners much tighter without squeezing out way too much caulk. I will fully admit it though, I would practice before heading straight to your final doors if you haven't handled a lot of caulk before. That's because handling caulk is truly an art form that takes a decent amount of skill and finesse to really do it right. But one weird thing I find works super well is using one of these cake decorating tools. Just run it along the caulk to get a perfect round over. Now, with those doors prepped for finish, it's time to get to the messy part. Painting. Painting can be an absolute nightmare if you don't prep right. Clearly, I do not have a dedicated spray booth, so some pre-tape painter's plastic rolls help dexterify my garage. I covered literally every inch of my garage with plastic because I don't want to make a mess. Time for paint, right? No. First, I need to prime everything. I got this battery-powered airless sprayer and I'm blown away by how well it works, and the primer dried in just a few hours. The only problem is it is water-based, so it did raise the grain, so with a foam pad and 320 grit piece of sandpaper, I can lightly remove all of the fuzz and imperfections. Now this will create a lot of dust, so make sure to vacuum and use a tack cloth to remove all the dust before moving on. Paint is another hot topic that people have very strong opinions on. I like the Sherwin-Williams Emerald Urethane stuff, and my wife and I chose Marine for our color. It's like a minty blue-green color that we both really like. Again, that airless sprayer really came in handy here to give me super even coat without any runs. Since I spent the time to properly prime everything, I only needed 2 coats of paint to get a flawless finish. And for cleanup, look how easy this plastic makes it. Just tear it off the walls, crumple it up in a ball, and you've got your shop space back. Absolutely worth the 10 or 15 bucks for this. Alright, let's address the obvious. The pocket hole screws on the underside of the small cabinets look awful, but there's an easy fix for that. Remember, this is pre-finished plywood, so nothing will stick to it. But I can scuff up the surface with my sander to remove the finish, and I'm also going to do the exact same thing on the side of the cabinet. This little detail sander is a hero when it comes to cabinetry projects because it can reach into tight spaces and is super, super light. But why bother scuffing up the outside of the cabinets? Well, when I was painting, I made some bonus decorative panels that are going to be attached to the outside of the cabinets to cover things up. Even though I scuffed up the surface and wood glue in theory should hold just fine, I'm going to use some thickened epoxy just to really make sure. After scribing this panel to fit perfectly, I could hold it in place with some 23 gauge pin nails that will be super easy to cover with a little bit of wood filler and paint later. Now here's one way that I dial in a perfect fit for decorative panels like this. The reality is that your walls are never perfectly level, so I can butt the panel against the wall and then mark out where I need to cut off the excess. These lines are almost guaranteed not to be parallel with other edges, so the track saw is your best option here. Simply set your track on the cut line and trim down your panel. With some more epoxy and pin nails, I can fasten this panel in place, and this is really starting to come together. Next up is popping on the face frame. I like to use a few pin nails to hold it on, and then support it all with some clamps with soft towels underneath as padding for the paint. And if you have a keen eye for detail, you may notice a large gap on the top. Nothing a good filler piece can't take care of though. While that epoxy sets up, let's turn our attention back to the cabinet doors. I want these to have some fancy soft close functionality, be hidden when the doors are closed, and be fully adjustable. Easiest way to do that is by using some nice European style hinges. Easiest way to install them is with this simple jig. Just line up the location on the door with the location on the jig. You'll notice that my jig looks different from the one you buy in the store though. It took me 35 prototypes, but I designed my own cup for the jig that you can attach your dust collection hose to. The one you're seeing me use here is an earlier prototype, but look how clean the cup is for the hinge. Now compare that to how the jig normally operates. So out of the box, this jig works just fine. You attach any drill, clamp it on your workpiece, but you can see that it creates a boatload of dust and takes multiple plunges just to drill out that hinge cup hole. Then when you're done, well, it's a mess and you have to clean it up. But there's an easier, simpler way. And that's where I come in. Simply take an Allen key to loosen up the stop collar on the stock drill bit, then rotate the stock drill guide cup and remove the drill bit. Then pick up one of my drill guide cups. You can then insert the drill bit in the bottom, slide that stop collar on top, tighten it up to make sure that nothing moves around, and now over on your hinge jig, you can just rotate it and lock it in place. Now attach your drill as you normally would, and grab your dust collection hose to attach it. Now, when you go ahead and drill out your hinge cups, you can see that there is virtually no dust anywhere, and it makes for a much, much faster and more efficient job. Pick up one today. You'll also notice that I lay down some masking tape to really help make sure all the holes are drilled cleanly, and now look how well those hinges fit in place. Creating custom products like that hinge cup is so much fun for me because I get to solve annoyances I have with things I use all the time, and is something I'm really focusing a lot of effort into. That jig used to annoy me, but now it's an absolute joy to use. You can pick up that accessory and tons of other things I've developed on my website. With the hinges installed on the doors, I also need to install the doors on my cabinets. There's a decent amount of measuring and planning that goes into making sure the hinges are in the perfect place. In fact, I've got multiple lessons inside of that course all about that to really help you out. Now, what am I going to put in those little cabinets? I have no idea. Probably something like extra paper towels or something that I don't really get to very often, but having more storage is always better in my eyes. With the hinges installed on their larger cabinet doors, I can also get them attached to the right upper cabinets. Now, why do I bother to purchase high-end hinges? Because of this. I did this on purpose, but you can see that the doors aren't in the same plane, but check out how easy this is to fix. On the hinge, there are a few cams that can be adjusted to move the door around and get it in the perfect spot. Oh, One last touch here is to add some cabinet bumpers to really give things a pro touch. And remember those shelf pin holes I drilled out earlier? Now is the time to put pins in, and now you've got adjustable shelves that, let's be honest, I will never move. We are in the final stretch here on this massive laundry room renovation project, but these final steps are critical to making sure everything turns out great. I like this hardware jig to help me drill out holes for the door pulls. One pro tip is to always use a scrap piece on the backside to prevent blowout. See how clean these holes are? Now just plop in the machine screws that came with the handles and you're good to go. My wife picked out these larger brass handles for the larger cabinets and smaller brass knobs for the smaller cabinets. In my head, I wasn't so sure I would like it, but once I got it installed, hey, I liked the way things looked. Now let's completely change gears from the cabinets and really make this laundry room pop. Want to know a confession? I've never done tile work in my life, so I figured a feature wall that everyone would look at and see every small detail would be the perfect place to start my tile installation career. Honestly though, it really wasn't all that bad. Messy? Yes. But difficult? Not really. With some careful planning, we knocked out the tile work in about an hour, then came back the next day to spread grout in all the cracks. It was kind of fun, but let's get back to the woodworking. With the tile completed, now this whole thing will really start to come together. I attached some cleats to the walls and then could bring in my floating shelf. This is heavy enough that it's really not going anywhere, but a few brad nails made it rock solid. Back in the garage, I attached the face frame to the lower cabinet. Remember this guy? I hope you didn't forget. I also attached some undermount slides to the side of the cabinet, and since the hardware was installed on the drawers earlier, now they just clip into place and I can test out that soft close. Yep, still satisfying. I also need to attach the drawer fronts to the drawers. I actually share 3 different methods for doing this inside the course that all work in different applications, but here's one that I like. I will fire in screws from the back to make an indent on the drawer front. Then I know exactly where to make a pilot hole where I can then drive the screw in the rest of the way to hold on the front. I like to start from the bottom, that way I can use spacers between the drawer fronts to work my way up. Now, just like the cabinet doors, I also need to install some hardware on these drawers. Seriously, if you haven't picked up a cabinet hardware jig like this one, you're crazy. It's incredibly affordable and takes out all of the guesswork and measuring, so you can absolutely fly through the hardware install, and you know everything will look perfect. Just make sure to use that scrap backer board to prevent any blowout though. I got one of these special diamond tile bits to drill through the tile, and because I'm an idiot and didn't measure correctly, I had to add some huge spacers behind the lower cabinet to attach it to the wall, and for it to be in the correct spot. Not my finest moment on YouTube, that's for sure. Now I can set the toe kick in place, get it all level, and then set the cabinet on top. After attaching it to the wall, I can install the center countertop and then attach the brass rod for hanging clothes.
This was a massive undertaking, but it was a blast. If you're interested in diving into absolutely every detail you need to know about making your own shaker-style doors and drawer fronts, don't forget to check out my online video course that has more than 2.5 hours of in-depth video lessons and is at its lowest price it will ever be. Just scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description. See you on the next one.